Hello everyone, hope you're doing great. In this chapter, chapter 9, we combine the three markets together. We already covered in chapter 3 the labor market, in chapter 4 the goods market, and in chapter 7 the assets market. So the aim of this chapter, chapter 9, the ISLM model, is to bring together the three markets into a general framework for macroeconomic analysis. So these are basically the main points in the chapter. The FE line, which represents equilibrium in the labor market, the IS curve, equilibrium in the goods market, the LM curve, which represents asset market equilibrium. Then we will bring the three markets together in a general equilibrium, complete ISLM model, and we lastly will see how to reach this general equilibrium through price adjustment. Today we will cover the first two parts, the FE line and the IS curve, which represent equilibrium in the labor market, and the second curve represent equilibrium in the goods market. First, the FE line. The FE line, as we said, is the equilibrium representing the equilibrium in the labor market. Labor market, as we saw in chapter 3, we saw that equilibrium in the labor market leads to employment at the full employment level M bar. When the labor market is in equilibrium, which means that the labor supply equals labor demand. When we plot labor supply as a positively sloped line against real wage, and we plot labor demand, the demand for labor by firms, as a downward sloping against real wage, the equilibrium point, when this equilibrium is achieved, we have M bar. What's M bar? This is the full employment level of employment that is achieved when the labor market is in equilibrium. When we have M bar, output produced is equal to Y bar, which is the full employment level of output. So Y bar is the output produced when the labor market is in equilibrium, when we have M bar. How to represent this graphically, the equilibrium in the labor market? We will plot output against the real interest rate. In all curves we will derive in this chapter, we have the real interest rate on the vertical axis and output Y on the horizontal axis. So you have to remember this in all curves you are drawing, to put the real interest rate on the vertical axis and the output on the horizontal axis. When we are plotting the FE line, FE is for full employment. So FE, this is the abbreviation of full employment, because we are plotting the equilibrium in the labor market at which the employment is at its full employment level, and hence output is at its full employment level also. How to plot output against real interest rate? We will draw a vertical line, since a labor market equilibrium is unaffected by changes in the real interest rate. And we'll show this in the next figure, but remember that it's a vertical line at Y bar, because the relation we are plotting is against the real interest rate, and the real interest rate has no effect on Y bar. Y bar, as we saw in chapter 3, is equal to what? It's equal to A times F of K and N bar, so it is not affected by the real interest rate. So here is the figure for the FE line. Again, we are plotting output against real interest rate. Real interest rate is on the vertical axis, output is on the horizontal axis. The equilibrium in the labor market is represented by the FE line. So the FE line is a vertical line constant at Y bar, because Y bar is not affected by the real interest rate. The real interest rate has no effect on Y bar, so it's drawn as a vertical line. This vertical line represents what? The FE line, the full employment level of output, represents what? Equilibrium in which market? Equilibrium in the labor market, because when we have equilibrium in the labor market, N is equal to N bar, and hence Y is equal to Y bar. So now what are the factors that shift the FE line? When does the FE line shift? The full employment level of output, which is Y bar, is determined by the equation I've just written, which we saw in chapter 3. Y bar is A, F of K and N bar. It's a function of capital stock K, and M bar, this is the full employment level of employment, and A is the productivity. So any change in any of these three factors will affect Y bar. The three factors are the full employment level of employment M bar, the current level of capital K, and productivity A. Any change in any of these three variables will shift the FE line. If they increase, the FE line will shift to the right. If they decrease, any of them decrease, the FE line will shift to the left. So as we did in previous chapters, we have a summary table that lists the different factors that affect the full employment line. So the factors will be listed in the summary table in the next slide. The full employment line, FE line, shifts right when there is an increase in Y bar. And when does Y bar increase? Remember the equation of Y bar. Y bar is equal to A f of K and N bar. So a change in an increase in K or N bar or A will increase Y bar and will shift the FE line to the right. This happens when there is a beneficial supply shock, because this will increase A, the productivity A, or can lead to, such as a technological innovation, can lead to a rise in the marginal product of labor, and hence an increase in the demand for labor, and hence an N bar increase. So the beneficial supply shock actually has two effects. It has a direct effect on A, it increases A, so it increases Y bar, or it increases Y bar through N bar, because the beneficial supply shock raises the productivity of labor, MBN, and hence increases M bar, and so Y bar also increases. The second factor is the increase in labor supply. When there is a higher labor supply, this will lead to a higher N bar and hence a higher Y bar. The third factor is the increase in the capital stock K. When capital stock increases, Y bar directly increase, or it also has an indirect effect. When K increase, the productivity of labor increase, the demand for labor increases, and so M bar increase. So again, also K has two effects. The direct one, it increases directly Y bar from the equation of Y bar, and it increases Y bar through its effect on M bar. So the increase in capital increase the demand for labor, increase N bar, and hence increase Y bar. And this is also summarized in the next summary table 11. If any of these factors are reversed, so we have an adverse supply shock, or a decrease in the labor supply, or a decrease in the capital stock, the opposite will happen. So Y bar will decrease. So this is the summary table we mentioned before, and this is the factors. Make sure you can know why these factors lead to a shift to the right of the FE line, and remember that if each of these factors is reversed, we have a shift of the FE line to the left. So if there is an adverse supply shock, or a decrease in labor supply, or a decrease in the capital stock, Y bar will decrease, so the FE line will shift to the left. Now we move to the second curve, or the second market, which is the goods market. We represent equilibrium in the goods market through the IS curve. So here, this is the second curve. We finished the FE line. Now we move to the IS curve, which represent the equilibrium in the goods market. So the goods market clears when desired investment equals desired national saving. This was our last lecture for chapter 4. We said that when does the goods market clear, or when does equilibrium is reached in the goods market? It's reached in the goods market when aggregate demand, the demand for aggregate demand for goods is equal to the aggregate supply of goods, or equivalently, the desired national saving equals desired investment. So this is the condition for the goods market equilibrium. Adjustments in the real interest rate bring about equilibrium. If there is a difference between desired national saving and desired investment, how to restore equilibrium again? Through adjustment in the real interest rate. For any level of output Y, the IS curve shows the real interest rate for which the goods market is in equilibrium. So the IS curve represents the equilibrium in the goods market. It represents the real interest rate that clears the goods market. And here the word clears, we will use it frequently. Clearing the market means that the market is in equilibrium. So the real interest rate that clears the goods market, this means this is the real interest rate at which aggregate demand equals aggregate supply, or at which desired national saving equals desired investment. So this is the IS curve. It represents the equilibrium in the goods market. Each real interest rate on this IS curve will be the goods market clearing real interest rate, which means this is the interest rate that clears the goods market, that achieves equilibrium in the goods market. How to derive the IS curve? We will derive the IS curve in the next figure, figure 9.2, from the saving investment diagram. So deriving the IS curve. Before we begin, why it's called an IS curve? Because it's the abbreviation of I is investment and S is saving. So at the IS curve, we said there is an equilibrium of the goods market. So I equals S. So it's IS means investment saving. This is the curve at which the goods market is in equilibrium. We will derive it right now, but remember that it's the curve that achieves the equilibrium in the goods market. So how we drive the equilibrium in the goods market? We draw the saving and investment against the real interest rate. This is the figure A. On the left hand side we have figure A, and on the right hand side figure B. So in the panel A, or figure A, we see that we draw the investment curve as a downward sloping curve because the relation with real interest rate is negative. The real interest rate, remember the user cost of capital. When the real interest rate increased, the user cost of capital increased, the desired capital stock decreases, and hence investment decreased. So the relation between the investment and the real interest rate is inverse, because real interest rate is a cost for investors. So when it increases, this will lead to a lower investment. So this is why we draw the investment curve as a downward sloping curve. The S curve, this is the saving curve. It's drawn as a positively sloped line because saving increases as the real interest rate increase. When the real interest rate increase, people will save more because they are now getting higher reward on their savings. So the relation is positive. The first saving curve we are drawing is for y equals 4,000. So this is the saving rate, or the saving curve for when output is equal to 4,000. So this is S associated with output of 4,000. What happens when this y, when this output or income y increases to 5,000? What happens? Remember from chapter 4, the variables that affect desired saving. What happens when the income or output increase? We said that when output or income increase, part of the increase in income will be devoted to consumption, and another part will be devoted to saving. So the increase the increase in y will have an effect on S, that it will increase also. So that's why we draw the new S curve as an increasing after y has increased to 5,000. So the new S, when y is equal to 5,000, it shifted to the right. Before the shift of the saving curve to the right after y has increased from 4,000 to 5,000, initially the equilibrium was at point D. This was the point of the goods market equilibrium at which saving equals investment. This point D is associated with R equals 7%. What's 7% called? This is the real interest rate that clears the goods market. Again, the word clears means that this is the interest rate at which the goods market is in equilibrium, because at this interest rate, saving is exactly equal to investment. So after the shift of the saving that happens because y increased, and again when y increased, the saving increased. So we have now a new equilibrium point F. This new equilibrium point F is associated with a lower real interest rate 5%. This is the new real interest rate that clears the goods market, that makes saving equal to investment. So we will translate this into the IS curve. The IS curve in the panel B is the relation. Again, it's as we said for the FE line, we are always plotting the real interest rate on the vertical axis and the output on the horizontal axis. But now the relation that IS curve represents is the equilibrium in the goods market and not the labor market as the FE line did. So here we are plotting the equilibrium in the goods market. That's why we draw first saving and investment. So when output was 4,000, we are plotting Y against R. So when Y was 4,000 in the saving investment diagram, the first saving curve which was associated with Y equals 4,000, the interest rate that clears the goods market was how much? It was 7%. Now when output increased to 5,000, so this is the other point F on both panels. So the point F is the point at which Y is equal to 5,000. Now the interest rate is now lower at 5%. So the IS curve, the main message of this is when we derive the IS curve, it's a downward sloping curve. So the IS curve represents a negative relation between output and real interest rate. So when output increases, the real interest rate that clears the goods market decreases. So here we say again what we have just said. The saving curve slopes upward. Why? When we draw the saving and investment diagram, the saving curve was sloping upward because a higher real interest rate increases saving. So it's a positive relation with the real interest rate. An increase in output shifts the saving curve to the right, as we saw in the figure, the slide before this. We saw that when output increased from 4,000 to 5,000, the saving shifted to the right because people save more when their income is higher. Part of the increase in their income will be devoted to saving, so the saving will shift to the right. The investment curve, when we draw it, it was a downward sloping because again the interest rate is a cost for investor. So the higher real interest rate reduces the desired capital stock, thus reducing investment. So if we consider two different levels of output as we did before, Y equals 4,000 and then Y increased to 5,000. This was the saving rate, the first saving curve, and the second was when Y equals 5,000, we drew another shifted version of the saving curve when the S shifted to the right. So here at the higher level of output, when output increased to 5,000, the saving curve is shifted to the right compared to the situation at the lower level of output. So the new saving curve that is associated with Y equals 5,000 is shifted to the right compared to the original saving curve that is associated with Y equals 4,000. Again, you have to look at the figures and see what we are talking about. Since the investment curve is downward sloping, equilibrium at the higher level of output has a lower real interest rate. What's the implication of the increase in Y on the real interest rate? This is the relation we are plotting to get the IS curve. To derive the IS curve, we are driving a relation between real interest rate and output. We are driving this relation through using the saving investment diagram. So when on the saving investment diagram, when Y increased, the equilibrium point shifted from point D to point F. So what happened to the real interest rate? It decreased from 7% to 5%. So when output increased, to translate this into the IS curve, when we had output of 4,000, and now look at the figure B. When we had output of 4,000, the interest rate was 7%. Now when output increased to 5,000 at point F, the interest rate is now lower at 5%. Thus, a higher level of output must lead to a lower real interest rate. So the main message is that the IS curve always will be downward sloping. The IS curve shows the relation between the real interest rate and output for which investment equal saving. So it's a relation between the real interest rate on the vertical axis and output on the horizontal axis, at which the goods market is in equilibrium. What does this mean? That investment equals saving. So any point on the IS curve is actually driven from the saving investment diagram. It's a point at which saving is exactly equal to investment. So point D in both figures, figure A and figure B, and point F, these 2 points are goods market equilibrium points, because at these points saving is exactly equal to investment. And as we said, the IS curve will slope downward because a higher output is associated with a lower real interest rate that clears the goods market. We can provide an alternative interpretation in terms of goods market equilibrium using the other condition. Remember, the goods market condition, it can be written as desired saving equals desired investment, or aggregate demand for goods is equal to the aggregate supply of goods. So we'll use the second definition of goods market equilibrium to reach the same conclusion that the IS curve is sloping downwards. Yeah, in both cases we get the same conclusion, that the IS curve slopes downward. So let's now see the alternative interpretation. Beginning at a point of equilibrium, for example point F, that was the original point of equilibrium. Why is point F equilibrium point in the goods market? Because this is the point, again look at the curve, it's the point at which saving equal to investment. So if we begin by this point F and suppose that the real interest rate rises, what happens? What happens is that when the interest rate rises, this causes people to increase saving and thus reduce consumption, and cause firms to reduce investment. So what's the effect of the real interest rate is to decrease both consumption and investment. The changes in interest rate will always give same trends in consumption and investment. So when real interest rate rises, this will reduce both consumption because people will save more, and this will reduce investment because the interest rate is a cost for investors. So in both cases the C and the I decrease. What are C and I? These are components of the aggregate demand. So when I say that C declines and I declines, this means that the aggregate demand, the quantity of goods demanded, declines. So how to restore equilibrium now? The quantity of goods supplied would have to decline, because now we begin with a point of equilibrium at which aggregate demand equals aggregate supply, which is point F. But now the interest rate has increased, so the aggregate demand decreases because of the decrease in consumption investment. So we are now how to restore the equilibrium. Now aggregate demand is lower than the aggregate supply. How to restore the equilibrium? To restore equilibrium, the aggregate supply has also to decline. So the quantity of goods supplied would have to decline. So higher real interest rates are associated with lower output. That's the IS curve slopes downward. So we reach the same conclusion, that to reach goods market equilibrium, if the interest rate rises, then the output has to decline. So in this example, when the interest rate increased from point F to point D, i.e. it increased from 5% to 7%, the output has to decrease from 5,000 to 4,000. So the relation is inverse and the IS curve slopes downward. Why does this happen? Because we need at each point to have a goods market equilibrium. So any change in the interest rate will make this equilibrium not achieved, because it will change the aggregate demand. When interest rate increase, for example, in this example, the interest rate increased from 5 to 7%. Now we have aggregate demand that is higher than the aggregate demand that is lower than aggregate supply. So how to restore the equilibrium? The aggregate supply has to decrease also. What's the aggregate supply? This is the quantity of output produced. This is Y. So Y has to decrease from 5,000 to 4,000 when the interest rate rises. Output decrease when interest rate rises. This means the relation is inverse. So we draw the IS curve as a downward sloping curve. Now let's discuss factors that shift the IS curve. Make sure you understand that in the previous slides we were just talking about movements on the IS curve itself. Why was this? Because we were changing output and the interest rate. So we are moving along the IS curve. Here we are not talking about movement on the curve, but we are talking about factors that shift the curve. So we have constant output. So here we do not change output. Output is constant, and we see the changes that leads to the shifting of the IS curve. Specifically for constant output, any change that reduces desired national saving relative to desired investment shifts the IS curve up and to the right. So when does the IS curve shift up and to the right? When the change or the factor we are talking about reduces desired national saving relative to desired investment. Intuitively, imagine constant output. A reduction in saving means that there is now more investment relative to saving, so the interest rate must rise to restore the equilibrium again, to reduce investment and increase saving, and so they become equal again. So we will see this in figure 9.3. Similarly, for constant output, a change that increases desired national saving relative to desired investment shifts the IS curve down and to the left. This is the inverse of what we said. If the factor increased desired national saving, it will shift the IS curve down and to the left. So we said in the last slide that when there is a decrease, when a factor reduces desired national saving relative to desired investment, this will lead to a shift of the IS curve up and to the right. How to show this graphically? We will show this in figure 9.3, the effect on the IS curve of a temporary increase in government purchases. Remember from chapter 4, when government purchases increase, this will lead to a decrease in desired saving. So the S curve, the saving curve, will shift from S1 to S2 due to this increase in G. We shall see now what the implication of this on the IS curve. When we have a saving curve that's shifted from S1 to S2, the equilibrium point has changed. The equilibrium point for the goods market has changed from point E, 6% interest rate, to point F, 7% interest rate, which means that the interest rate has increased. This is what we said last slide, the previous slide, that when saving, a factor that reduces desired saving relative to desired investment, such as in this case, when government increased purchases, increase G, so it decreases S, we have a higher interest rate. How to translate this into the IS curve? Remember, the factor that changed is G, so we have a constant Y. So when you draw the new IS curve, you have to keep the Y fixed. The Y is fixed at 4,500, for example, at any level, but it's constant. So when you draw the new equilibrium point F, it's at the same vertical line as E, because we do not change Y. Here we are talking about factors other than Y that change. Here the factor that changes is G and not Y. So Y is constant, but what happened? Now we have a higher interest rate that clears the goods market. It became from 6%, it's now higher at 7%, because we got point F from the new equilibrium point at panel A. At panel A, the new equilibrium point is F when S shifted to the left, when there is a reduction in the desired saving. We got point F at which the interest rate is 7%, so it's higher. So how to represent the IS curve, the new IS curve? The Y is fixed, but the interest rate is higher. So how can I draw the IS curve in this case? It has to be shifted up and to the right. That's why we said that any factor that reduces desired national saving relative to desired investment will cause the IS curve to shift up and to the right. This is shown in figure 9.3. And remember, when you draw this, you have to maintain output constant and increase the interest rate. So you have moved from curve IS1 to curve IS2, at which output is still fixed at, say, 4,500, but now the interest rate increased from 6% to 7% due to the decline in the national saving. Again, there is an alternative way of stating this, of stating the factors that shift the IS curve. by using the other condition for the goods market equilibrium, which is aggregate demand equals aggregate supply. So here, when I'm talking about shifting in the IS curve, again, it's for a given level of output, which means that we are not changing output. Again and again, we are talking about factors other than output that cause the IS curve to shift. So because output leads to a movement on the IS curve and not a shift. So to have a shift, we are making output constant. So it's for a given level of output, a change that increases aggregate demand for goods shifts the IS curve up and to the right. So this is the other way to express the shift in the IS curve. The IS curve will shift up and to the right. We saw in the previous slides when the desired national saving decreases relative to desired investment. Another way to state this is to say that the IS curve will shift up and to the right when the aggregate demand increases. In this case, the increase in aggregate demand for goods exceeds the supply, so the real interest rate must rise to reduce desired consumption and investment and restore equilibrium between AD and AS, which is the aggregate demand and aggregate supply. So when we have a factor that changed, that increased the aggregate demand, as in the example we just saw, that government increased its purchases, so it increased the aggregate demand in the market. Now the aggregate demand has become higher than the aggregate supply. So how to restore equilibrium in the goods market? The real interest rate must rise to reduce. We said that the interest rate affect aggregate demand because it affects C and I, and it affects C and I in the same way. So when the interest rate increase, it leads to a reduction in consumption because people will save more, and will lead to a reduction in investment. So when this happens, the interest rate rise, aggregate demand is now lowered, and thus it returned to be equal to the aggregate supply, and we restored the equilibrium. Remember that here we are saying that output is constant. So a change that increases aggregate demand, it makes aggregate demand greater than this aggregate supply. So the only way to restore equilibrium is that real interest rate has to change. So the real interest rate must rise so as to decrease the aggregate demand and make it equal to the aggregate supply, which is constant, because we are saying here that the output is constant. So the only way to make aggregate demand equals aggregate supply again is that the interest rate rises, so it decreases the aggregate demand and get it again equal to the aggregate supply, because it initially increased due, for example, to an increase in G, increased the aggregate demand, so it become greater than the aggregate supply. How to make aggregate demand again equal to the aggregate supply? While aggregate supply is constant, the interest rate has to increase to decrease the aggregate demand and make it again equal to the aggregate supply. Again, we can summarize the factors that shift the IS curve in the summary table shown in the next slide. But remember that when we say that the IS curve shifts up and to the right, we mean that the real interest rate increases. When you saw in the figure of the increase in G, when we got an IS curve that's shifted up and to the right, it means that the real interest rate that clears the goods market increase. And this happened when we said we can represent this by two things. By first, that this happens when the desired national saving is reduced relative to the desired investment, or the aggregate demand increase. Any of these will lead to a shift of the IS curve up and to the right. So the IS curve shifts up and to the right if the desired national saving, if any factor reduces desired national saving relative to desired investment, or any factor increase the aggregate demand. So what are specifically the factors that will reduce desired national saving or increase aggregate demand, so will lead to the shifting of the IS curve up and to the right? They can be summarized in these factors in bold or in bullets. The increase first, an increase in expected future output. Why would this lead to a shift of the IS up and to the right? Because it leads to what? Because it leads to a reduction in desired national saving. Remember again from chapter 4, when people are expecting more money in the future, they consume more and save less. So this is a factor that reduces desired national saving, and hence it will lead to a shift of the saving curve to the left. And as this will be the same as the figure we just saw in the previous slides, this will lead to a shift of the IS curve up and to the right. The other factors include an increase in wealth, because this also reduces desired saving, because it increases desired consumption, a temporary increase in government purchases, and this is the figure we saw in the slides, a decline in taxes, but given that Ricardian equivalence does not hold. This is again chapter 4. If Ricardian equivalence holds, there will be no change. So to guarantee that a change will occur in the IS curve, we have to mention that we are assuming that Ricardian equivalence does not hold. So we do not have Ricardian equivalence. So here, when taxes decline, people are not looking into the future to what will happen to future taxes. They are just looking to the current, what happens currently. So what happens currently is that the government reduced taxes. So how will this affect their behavior? They will increase their consumption. So when they increase their desired consumption, this means that desired national saving will decline. So this is also a factor that shifts the IS curve up and to the right. The last two factors are related to what the expected future marginal product of capital and the effective tax rate on capital. They are related to investment. I will leave for you how can this affect the IS curve. How will this, it's written here that this will lead to an increase in the expected future marginal product of capital, will lead to a shifting of the IS curve up and to the right. Why is this? Because this will affect investment and not savings. So to represent this graphically and make sure you know how to draw this, you will shift which curve? The investment curve and not the saving curve. The saving curve was shifted due to the previous factors, but the last two factors are related to investment. So now you will shift the investment curve. So make sure to shift the investment curve. And so how will this affect the IS curve? These two factors will shift the IS curve up and to the right. So make sure that you can draw this shift. Why this happened? Because an increase in expected future marginal product of capital makes indesired investment increases. This is again from chapter 4. So the investment section of chapter 4. So the investment curve will shift to the right. It will increase. How will this affect the IS curve? Remember that from the curve of S and I, you get what will happen to the interest rate. When the investment curve shifts to the right because it increased, the interest rate will increase. So when the interest rate that clears the goods market increase, how you will shift the IS curve? You will shift it up and to the right, because we have constant output and the IS curve now is at a higher interest rate. For the constant output, we have a higher interest rate. So this factor also will lead to a shift of the IS to the up and to the right. The last factor is the decrease in the effective tax rate on capital. This factor also will increase investment, because taxes are again increases the user cost of capital. Again, chapter 4, the investment section. When the tax rate on capital is now lower, this will increase the desired investment for investors. This will increase their desired investment. So again, the investment curve will shift to the right, and we have a shift of the IS curve to the up and to the right, because the interest rate is now higher. The IS curve will shift down and to the left if we have the opposite of these factors. So when there is a decrease in expected future output, when there is a decrease in wealth, when there is a decrease in G, when there is an increase in taxes, when there is a decrease in the marginal product of capital, or an increase in the effective tax rate of capital. So we will get the opposite, that the IS curve will shift down and to the left, because now the interest rate will be lower. The real interest rate that clears the goods market would be lower, so we get the opposite effect. And the next slide we will show the summary table. So here is the summary table for the factors that shift the IS curve. They are 6 factors, so make sure you understand how the IS curve will shift, and the reason for this is written also. So this is how each of these factors will affect desired saving or desired investment. You can draw this graphically and see how the IS curve will shift. You have the shifts here and have the reason for the shift. So make sure you understand each of these factors correctly and able to draw the new IS curve after the shift. Remember that for taxes we have two cases: the Ricardian equivalence will not lead to any change of the curves, and the other case when Ricardian equivalence does not hold. Here in this table we are assuming an increase in any of these factors. What will happen to the IS curve? You will get the inverse results if there is a decrease in the factor rather than an increase. Thank you.